How do you plan a book? It's the age-old question that everyone asks when they get started. Now, a few months ago, I read this book called On Writing by Stephen King. You've probably heard of it. It's basically his autobiography, which he shares the tricks of a trade. I'd read it before, maybe a year prior, and in it, he discloses that his method of writing, or planning more so, is called pantsing, right? Which means there is no plan. You put interesting characters in difficult scenarios, and the story unravels. Obviously, you can practice this by creating a setting and then just generating any random character and then seeing how it flows. Now, it does take practice, and yes, you must be a good writer for this to work. It's not as easy to go off on a whim as it may seem, because we are so used to conforming to structure, especially when writing, because the opposite method is to strategically and strictly stick to a plan. For example, you would have chapter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the overarching premise that it must cover. For example, this character must do this. This setting is strictly for this chapter, blah, blah, blah. Now, this may be a limitation for creativity for some, because as I said before, Stephen King's book, he states that this takes the fun out of his writing. But some people actually need this structure in which to persist. So you can pick either of the two, right? Wrong. Don't pick either. Choose both. You should learn to use both because they're both tools. Now, you will obviously favor one over the other, but that comes with time, and you'll eventually gain your own style, and you'll use that when you're crafting your own works. However, when starting out, because this is strictly for people that are starting out, right? They need a good foundation, and the best foundation is to apply all the effective tricks in which you can. So, first off, what I would do is I would do a quick write. For the first quick write, I would make it super simple. Random prompt generator, random character generator, random setting generator. Get one of your friends to think of a random character and write them into a place, and so that you can practice the whole pantsing strategy, which is where you write without a plan. And in addition, you're going to plan out a quick write. You're going to preemptively create that character and what is going to occur during that 200, 300, 400, 500 words, right? I think 500 words is pretty decent. And in doing so, you get the best of both worlds. You can see what works better. But keep in mind, this is in a smaller scale. So it's not going to be as effective as if you were to write an entire book. Because some people find that pantsing is very effective for a certain duration of words, or a certain amount of words, and then following that, planning is better. So again, you would want to do that as you can essentially cater to your own preferences. As for me personally, I perform a bit of a hybrid of the two. I do have a strict plan of what the character must do in the specified time frame. However, I change it as I see fit. And if I feel as though that my character would act a certain way out of the given actions, then I cause a bit of a shift in the story, which means that sometimes I have to rewrite my endings several times just to get a take in which properly reflects the character. But you shouldn't always have it solely on the basis of a single character. That's just an example that I've used, but obviously it's going to depend on what you're writing, how you're writing it, so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to touch on another topic, in which is pantsing. How and when. So as I was saying for plan, sometimes you just disregard it. Now, when I write my longer pieces, let's say 60k plus words, because I feel like around the 40-50k mark, my characters are completely different or have completely shifted from what they initially were thought out to act, behave, and put themselves forward in this book. So with this shift in mind, what I do is I basically just grab my plan and I pants. Obviously, this is going to be a lot more difficult in the editing phase because I'm going to have to cater to these changes. Now, this is something you have to keep in mind. The editing that comes with the planning style. See, with the straightforward, strategic, to the point planning, it's a lot more upfront labor because it might take hours upon hours to build this plan. However, the actual writing, it should be a breeze because you've set it all up You follow it out as so, and you won't really need to rewrite too much because you've already pre-thought of what you were going to write before you wrote it. You've taken all the back-end labor away. So your revision is going to be less intense, where if you're pantsing, which is just writing whatever you wish or what you think the character would feel like, you may need multiple revisions because especially if you do it for prolonged durations, like thousands and thousands of words, you may notice some inconsistencies and flaws because, again, we are only human, and when we write, we may not remember anything. Oh, not anything, but everything, sorry. And in saying that, we need to take this into consideration because, for example, if we write a character brutish, strong, and let's say he's going to fight someone, right? The warrior-based characteristics. And then later, we want to add nuance to him. For example, make him more charismatic and intelligent. You don't want a straight shift downwards, if that makes sense, because you're completely changing the character and the basis. The hints or the subtleties of the character's multifaceted nature should be planted right from the start, which means you might have to go back and revise the early portions of the text in which the brutish elements shine through, but there's also these hints of ambiguity and the differentiating character traits, which is very important. Though pantsing does involve strong characters, because I said it's what would the character do rather than what would I want the character to do. Also, I should also mention that the opposite is true. When you are strategically planning out your text, if you decide to do so, even though you should be doing both, you may realize that your characters are bland and faceless because you haven't fleshed out your characters. You fleshed out the story, but not your characters enough. So this is why you've got to incorporate both elements. You don't want flat characters, but at the same time, you don't want your characters to go off the rails and then you have to do a big cleanup at the end. Because remember, when editing is the most tedious process. And let's be real, no one likes to edit. So if you can front load as much of a work as possible without killing your characters, then you've ultimately achieved in terms of planning your story. However, this is not always achievable. This is why planning, like everything in regards to writing, is a skill. You're not going to get it straight away. You might have to take multiple attempts. It might take even multiple books. It took me what did I say? The first book I wrote, it was all strategically planned out. And the characters had no personality, nothing. They just got, in my story, they all get murdered, unfortunately. This was never released or anything, so no one's read it besides me. I'm just putting it out there. The character was just bland and boring, and I would not read that. The storyline is beautiful, it's great, it's epic, but the characters need to supplement that storyline. They shouldn't be the head focus, but they should supplement. And since they didn't supplement it in the way in which I wanted to, the story ultimately failed. And then the next story I wrote, I did the complete opposite. I said, well, these are my characters. They have strong views and values. They're very polarizing. But in doing that, let's try and get a result in which the characters drive the story. But then the story was more so a piece together and not an actual story. It was a bunch of random occurrences that just so happened to befall this character, right? And I think that is such a flawed way of writing a story because there's no overarching premise, because it's really hard to push a purpose, a moral, or a premise when there's no underlying structure. Of course, you can do it, but it's quite difficult. Anyway, that's enough for today. Remember, practice both the pantsing method, so writing on your toes, writing at the edge of your seat, edge of your pants, that's why it's called that. Edge of your pants doesn't really make sense, but when to go with it. Pants at the edge of a seat is what I meant. So practice that, writing on a whim, and also practice planning out your work, and so that you can front load most of the effort, because that's going to assist you a lot in terms of revision, because I realize that most people quit around those stages. Anyway, I hope this assisted you. I'll be making more videos of a similar nature. Also, I've got a book coming out soon, Cutthroat Carnival. It's a short story. It is quite short, but it's a good read. The characters are lovable, enjoyable. Well, not so much lovable, but unique. Unique's a good word. And the storyline is, personally, I would say quite interesting. I've got a cover artist and everything, so hopefully it's a magnificent piece of art. I've obviously already read it because it's my book, but I know you'll enjoy it. Anyway, see ya.